Okay, there's a lot of reviews out there for the Dark Eldar's Codex itself, but far fewer people have really gone through the Homunculus Covens, and so I thought I'd just do one myself, give an overview of it, talk about what I think seems to work really well, and take it as a totally new item, not as, what's different from the old Dark Eldar's Codex. So to start with, I'm just going to cover the Covens rules themselves, then I'll run through the different units in it. So if you take a Homunculus Coven, you have a limited list of what you can take. Basically, you can take HQs, which are going to be Homunculi or Urian Rackart. You can take Elites, as long as they're Grotesques or Racks. You can take the Transports, the Venoms and the Raiders, and you can take the Heavy Pain Engine and Parasite Engine, and that's it. That's all you can really take from the Codex itself. In terms of what you get if you take a Coven, let me say first, there's a lot of formations in this Codex supplement, and I think most people will just take the formations. And I think this is really the case because you get more out of the formations than you do out of just taking a Coven's attachment, and realistically, there aren't many combinations that you would get by taking the detachment and not taking a formation. So you get the extra rule benefit from the formation. But let's just go through what you get and what the rules let you do. Alright. Just covering it. If you're going to take the forces of the Covens, and I'm not really sure if you can see this, so basic rules here. You change your powers from pain table. This is probably the biggest benefit to this supplement, because on round 2 or round 1, if there's a Homunculus or Urian Rackart near the unit or in the unit, you become fearless. Meaning that even though Grotesques have terrible leadership, they don't run away anymore. Same thing for Racks and Homunculi. They're never going to run. Not after turn 2. And it gets better and better. I think turn 3, when you cause fear, it's not all that useful. It will not die on round 4. It doesn't help the Racks, but it does help everything else in the army. Round 5, I think, is when you get the biggest boost outside of Fearless is the addition of Zealot on round 5, which means you get to re-roll on your first round of combat, so you basically gain Hatred as well as Fearless. There is one significant weakness to this compared to the power from pain table in the Dark Eldar's Codex, and this is worth noting. In the Dark Eldar's Codex, you get Furious Charge. There is no way to get this in the Coven's supplement, which means Racks are always going to be Strength 3. And that's important because a Strength 4 Rack with Zealot has a chance of taking down really light tanks like Rhinos, Razorbacks, and things, but it can't do that anymore. It also would get to reroll wounds against anything that's guard equivalent. Because of poison in the first round of combat, doesn't get to do that anymore. So that's the one trade-off I see, but I think the addition of Fearless pretty much makes everything better. Alright, next thing to know is that if you take the forces of the Covens, you cannot have access to the artifacts of cruelty from the Dark Eldar's Codex. And this is important, so you get diabolical playthings instead. And I think this is one of the big trade-offs, because there are 3 items in the Artifacts of Cruelty that I think are really useful. The Animus Vitae, though that is situational. The Helm of Spite is probably the big one, because it's the only strong anti-psychic defense that a pure Dark Eldar's army has. You can't get that on a Homunculus that's using the forces of the Covens rules, because they have to take things off the diabolical playthings list. The last is the armor that would give your homunculus a 4 up, 6 up armor with the fear rule and the bubble around it. I find that useful if the Haemonculus is going to be your warlord. So what about the diabolical playthings? Well, they have a mix of somewhat useful but not awesome special artifacts. The first one is the Sump, which is okay. It says at the beginning of the turn, let me see if I can turn the camera a little bit. At the beginning of the turn, your Haemonculus, and only a Haemonculus can get these items, gets to choose from a list of powers from It Will Not Die, to Fleet, to Poisoned, to Rampage. Not a bad list. The Vexitor Mask, probably not going to be all that useful. It knocks your opponent down -5 on their initiative in a challenge. The Orbs of Despair, this is basically a grenade that causes instant death, and it's AP2, but it only causes wounds on a 6, unless you're shooting at grots. I'm not sure it's worth 25 points. It might be if it was worth less. The Haemivores, these are just additional attacks for your Haemonculus in close combat. Also, probably not really worth it. The Panacea Perverted, that one's not bad. It gives you a It Will Not Die and on a 4+, and it protects you against poisoned wounds. The last one is the Nightmare Doll, and it's expensive, but the Nightmare Doll adds 1 to any Feel No Pain rolls, and it's important how it's worded, because it says it adds 1, not that it reduces the required roll by 1. So it sounds like it stacks with the Parasite engine, which says it can't be better than a 4+, but you're still at a 4+, you just add 1 to your roll. And it's written in such a way that rules as written would apply. It also protects you from the first instant death roll you make. Other than that, I'm not impressed with the diabolical playthings. Okay, warlord traits. If your warlord is a Haemonculus, you can choose to roll on the table on the right. This is interesting because if you choose to run a warlord who is not a Haemonculus, you would roll on the table in the Dark Eldar's Codex. And you can do that because if you take a Grotesque Abomination or an Akathist, and I don't think I would ever use an Akathist as a warlord, unless I was running a really themed army and I was playing in a campaign and that Akathist was going to turn into a Haemonculus in the next mission or something, and you really wanted to run the theme, maybe he'd be an okay warlord. I think the Abomination from the Grotesques might be okay. He's pretty hard to kill, and he's got a bubble of guys around him that are part of his unit, and you could even attach something that's really hard to kill to that unit and protect your warlord. So that might be an option. But if you do that, then you roll on the other tables. So the warlord traits, they're not bad. Some of them you basically can pick if you take the right formations. The first one that gives a reroll of 1s on the Feel No Pain rolls to the engines within 12 inches is awesome. The one that gives you It Will Not Die to Grotesques is okay if you have Grotesques. The one that gives you a 1 to your... You can add or subtract 1 to your reserve rolls. It's okay. It doesn't really fit well with the theme, but okay. The Master Epicurean one, I find this one is not awesome. It basically says you get a victory point if your warlord dies from an AP1, AP2, or instant death weapon. You get D3 victory points. So it could prevent your opponent from scoring points for Slay the Warlord, basically. But it's pretty situational. The next one gives you a Feel No Pain of a 4+ on racks. If the warlord is part of the unit. Okay. Gives the warlord a Feel No Pain on a 4+ too. It's okay. And then the last one gives you preferred enemy on your Haemonculus. Okay. I think that one's alright. But I think overall, the forces of the Covens, let me flip to the next page here. I don't think most people are actually going to run Covens forces using the Coven detachment. I think they'll use formations. So if you run a Covens detachment, the only other rule, and this rule carries over to all of the formations, is that any enemy unit within 12 inches suffers a -1 to its leadership because of Freakish Spectacle. And this doesn't stack with other Freakish Spectacle units, but it can be useful. It takes 1 off their leadership, as long as they're within 12 inches of you. And that would include your Raiders and Venoms as dedicated transports. So, it does have some benefit. I covered this as it was, so HQ, you have to have 2 of them, you have to have 2 elites. I just don't see it happening often because I think the formations are better, and I'm going to run through each formation and talk about my experience with them.